Awesome. All right, I think that's everything up and running. Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Most likely good evening to those of you based in New Zealand and Australia. Thank you so much for joining. And also good morning to those in the UK who've joined us this early. My name is Natalie and I am a program coordinator here at Pagoda Projects. Today's event is about being a sustainable travel, which is especially relevant to me as I am Pagoda's CSER champion. I'm joined by the wonderful Sally Roderick, who is a travel blogger and content creator. So today, if you've not joined any of our events before, it'll last around about 45 minutes to an hour. We highly encourage questions and comments from you guys. So please do feel free to use and make the most of the chat and the Q&A function. So for the first half, myself and Sally will just kind of have a chat about the topic and answer any questions that come in. And then we'll open it up to the floor and have more of a discussion with you guys. But before we jump into questions, Sally, I'd love it if you could give an introduction to yourself, your background, and kind of your journey.
Yeah, sure. So hello, I'm Sally, obviously. Not too long ago, I was doing something pretty similar to Natalie at a university. So I was kind of working on the university end of things in Melbourne, helping students like you guys do internships previously overseas, now virtually as well. But yeah, to be completely honest, I had enough of working for someone else, and I've always loved to travel. And obviously the situation in the world has put things on hold a little bit. But yeah, at the start of this year, I left my job to start a travel blog and travel Instagram. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been working on this year. Sally Fees is my blog, and it's got a really big focus on budget travel, but also sustainable travel. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. I spent a few years at uni doing my undergrad and postgrad in tourism, and more specifically in the area of sustainable tourism. I really think that travel can be a force for good for people and for our environments all around the world, but I've also seen that it can be really bad when not done correctly. So it's an area that I'm passionate about. Like, most people love to travel. I'm sure you guys all do. Obviously, you're on a program that kind of links you with countries and different cultures from around the world. And I'm sure once you can get on a plane, you will. But I hope today encourages you to kind of think before you do that. And it doesn't mean don't do that. And it's definitely not going to be about that, because travel is my largest passion and love in life. And I continue to do lots of it. But I think it's really important that we're all aware of how we can make our travels a little bit more kinder to the places that we visit. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today. I hope to share with you today and through my blog and my Instagram more about sustainable travel and inspiring you to travel in general, but also just kind of reminding everyone what they can do to be a little bit kinder. So yeah, we've got lots to discuss about that topic now.
Exactly. Awesome. I also think it's just such an opportune time, in spite of what's happened due to COVID. I think it's been helped us to be able to reset and think about our habits in all aspects of life, but in particular with travel, as we literally have not been able to do this for a while. So I think it's so important to have these conversations so we can start thinking about it before we start leaving and traveling again, essentially. But I guess the first question that I want to ask might seem super basic, but I think it's quite important. So what is sustainability to you specifically?
It's not basic. It's actually a really, really difficult question. It's kind of easy to talk about examples of what you can do to be sustainable, but like, sustainability overall is a really challenging topic. To me, sustainability is kind of broken down into three main parts. So this is a little bit like academic, but it's a really good way of looking at it. So there's the environment, which is what most people think of immediately when they think of sustainability, like, the natural environment, the physical environment around the world that we live in. But sustainability also kind of encompasses like society, people, culture, and also our economy and profit and finance. So to me, it's a kind of a culmination of those three things, and looking at how we can act and behave in certain ways that helps to keep our world, both our physical environment and also the society and cultures and economies that we're a part of, moving in a steady state. So obviously the world has changed a lot over the past however many years, however long you believe the world has been around for. I guess it's always been constantly changing, but it's pretty clear that the point at which human development and industrial development started to ramp up, the changes have been remarkably more significant, obviously to the environment, but also to cultures and to societies and to the way we live. So I think to me, sustainability is trying to do what we all can do to help keep a consistent balance in where we're at in the world and to not worsen the situation for our environment and for cultures and for people around the world.
Awesome. That's a great way of breaking it down. Definitely before speaking with you, I had never considered the cultural and societal aspect or impact. There, when you hear sustainability, I think a lot of people will immediately jump to the environmental aspect, the actual physical damage that's being done to the planet, as opposed to sustainability in cultures. So we'll definitely touch on that later, as I'm super interested in that. But you kind of touched on like why sustainability is important, but could you expand on that a little bit, just for those who are maybe been asleep and not been, noticing what's been going on? Obviously, COP26 is something that happened recently. Like, why are they having these big conferences like this?
Yeah, so I mean, look, like you said, the first thing that comes to mind for people when they think of sustainability is the environment. And there's a good reason for that because our environment is changing rapidly, not for the better, unfortunately, in most cases. Global warming, I'm sure, even if you live under a rock, you understand that our climate is changing, Earth and our atmosphere is getting hotter. And as a result, different different things are happening to our world, to landscapes, to nature, to animals, and obviously to humans as well. So things are changing at a rate that's faster than they ever have before. And it's because human development and industrial development and just us living on the planet in such a resource intense way is changing things, and it's getting to a point of no return. People have different opinions on what that point is and if we've reached it or not, but things are changing in our environment and they can't be reversed. So it's always been, I think, something that people should have done, and many people kind of say now is a critical moment. I'm not sure if it's now or if it was 2 years ago or if it's 2 years into the future, but I think no matter your beliefs, it's pretty undeniable that the environment is falling to pieces in many ways. Ice is melting, animals are becoming extinct, like there are terrible things happening all around the world. Sea levels are rising, islands are going to go under soon, and we're going to lose entire countries and nations. So yeah, I mean, it's important because we have to stop the rate at which we're changing our planet, and to come back to the other aspects, of the economy and society and people and cultures, and the way that we live is changing, and that's not a bad thing. Like there are plenty of advantages to modern day life, like medicine and electricity and things like that, but the way that societies work and cultures that were once really rich and important and have kind of survived tradition through many, many different stages of life on Earth are crumbling. We don't have the same culture anymore. People are morphing into being the same, which isn't, it's not a good thing. Like people want to develop, and that's not a bad thing, but we're losing a lot of the uniqueness that we have around our world just through the way that we're living, and economies are trending towards big developed countries, and people who are rich getting richer and people who are poor aren't really changing. So there are a number of reasons. Like it kind of stems back to all the world's issues, really, is because we just keep moving at rates that we can't keep up with. And one of the key principles of sustainability is trying to preserve things for the future, and things aren't going to be around for the future anymore. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear, no matter what your opinion is on certain issues in the world, that there's a need to slow the rate that we're moving and the rate that we're using our Earth, because it's not going to be here for that long. If we keep doing that, we're going to run out of things, and we're going to run out of goodwill on the planet. So yeah.
Definitely. I think your point on how, in the past things have happened that have in fact propelled our world to great places, but ultimately this was not sustainable, and we didn't realize that at the time, and we now realize just how impactful in a negative way it is. And while we could easily just like keep going, ultimately it's not going to have a great effect on the planet at all, and it could, I mean, just based on how things are going in the past couple of years, we can see the devastating impacts of it. So it's time to kind of rethink how we can change these processes and do it in a more sustainable way, kind of like traveling. But I think a lot of people tuning in and watching will be like, well, can travel even be sustainable? Will it kind of ever be sustainable? Should we not just not travel at all? Is that not the answer here? So can travel be sustainable, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think, to be completely honest, the answer is no, because I don't think if you really got down to like the technical definition of what is sustainable and the actions that we the way we live and the impacts that we have on the world, like humans aren't really sustainable. We can see that as history has shown, like no matter whether you're traveling or you're not traveling, you still use resources, consume energy, have an impact on the environment around you. So travel and human nature, whether you're on the road or whether you're at home, is inherently unsustainable if you want to get technical. But I think travel can be made more sustainable. And I think we're at a point where even if everybody stops traveling, the world isn't going to repair itself. And there are also a whole host of benefits that travel can bring to the environment, to communities around the world, to economies. So no, it can never be really sustainable. And I think that's a really, really crucial thing to remember, that no one's ever going to get it completely right, because it's just not possible to get it completely right. No one can live and not have impact that can, be negative on our planet. But it can be done much more sustainably than we've done it in the past. Like there are so many positive things that we can all do, big and small, and at an individual level, and also at like a travel industry level, to make it more sustainable. So I think more sustainable is the answer, but not completely sustainable, because I just don't think that's possible anymore, really.
Absolutely. Like you said, everything we do emits carbon, and that's the issue here. So whether it's some sort of travel, like any little thing that you do in the world, you're emitting carbon and still contributing, right? It's just how we decide to go about that in our day-to-day lives and how we travel that we can really kind of turn that around, or not turn that around, but certainly make it a better process that it isn't as harmful to the planet. Um, but I wanted to kind of pick a little bit more into the breakdown of the cultural and societal side. I think the environmental side will be something that a lot of the listeners will already know about, because it is very physical. You can see it with your eyes, but maybe the cultural and societal side is something that's a bit new for some people listening. So if you could maybe talk about cultural and societal sustainability, how we can be mindful of smaller cultures and societies when we travel.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, small cultures, large cultures, I think when people think of travel and they think of, different cultures, it's always, our mind always goes to lesser developed countries. And that's not an untrue thing and that's not a bad thing, but it applies in all different contexts. But I think it is the simplest way to look when you consider undeveloped or lesser developed countries. Um, but yeah, like sustainability and traveling has an impact on the environment, but it also can have an enormous impact on cultures. So, the places that we visit and you think of those lesser developed countries where tourism has boomed, like I'm going to use Bali as an example, because I think most people, if you're from Australia or New Zealand, you're pretty familiar. And like from a tourism like industry point of view, when Bali first took off, it was a nightmare. It was a sustainability nightmare. Um, Obviously the environment was trashed, if you want to put it straight out there, like untapped levels of tourism development, um, and no consideration usually for the locals. So things that can happen in the tourism industry that can be really negative on society is a lot of international and foreign investment. So it's not something that you think about when we travel, but who you choose to book with and places that you stay and tour companies that you use aren't contributing to the local community. They come in and use all the tourism resources of that country, like obviously the natural beauty or the attractions, but also the water, the energy, all those resources that we need to travel and that companies need to host tourists, and there's no gain to the locals. The money doesn't stay in the community. The more obvious things are just people traveling from one culture to another, especially when you are moving from, I suppose, a more developed area to a lesser developed area. We live very different lives. Travel can have a really, it can be really difficult for people in lesser developed countries to be consistently faced with people who have more than they do. And it can go back to kind of like colonialism, and it gets quite complicated if you think about it that way, but it's still that kind of white privilege, and that's a really massive issue in tourism, and it's not something that you immediately think about, but that is a big sustainability problem. Who's benefiting from travel, how travel flows. Usually it is flowing from developed countries to lesser developed countries. Why is it always going to be that way? Where your money goes, does it stay in the communities that's hosting you, or does it just go out to large corporations in developed countries that already make a lot of money? But there are really good things that travel can do for culture and society. People want to visit different cultures and they want to experience parts of those cultures, and that means that they're preserved. That's a really positive thing. Things that traditions and customs and crafts or performances or things that have been a really big part of societies around the world, like development, regardless of travel, can just these things can die off. People modernize and they change the way they live and they forget about things like that. But if there's an interest in those things through tourism, people want to come to different places and experience different aspects of cultures that they're not familiar with. It can keep them alive. The same goes for physical culture and heritage, really old buildings and ruins and temples and other religious sites that, there's an incentive to preserve them because people are really interested to see them. So that can be a really positive benefit to culture and society. And you can't ignore that when travel is done correctly, the economic benefit when it's going to local communities is huge. It can really improve the livelihoods of people, both through, direct employment and direct income, but also, countries and governments that can profit from travel through taxes or things like that and stimulation of economies. They help that travel and tourism can be a way to raise countries into higher levels of development. So better healthcare, better education, the country overall, the economy overall is stimulated through tourism, and that can help to lift the standard of living for everybody. And the flow-on effects from tourism are huge. So you stay in a local hotel and that local hotel uses your money to pay someone else to do your laundry and pay someone else to buy food that you use, and someone who sells food buys it from a local farmer. And the flow-on effects from one person doing one activity or staying in one accommodation in a different area can be huge. Like, you don't think of all the indirect layers around the tourism industries that are there to support travelers. So yeah, there are tons of benefits, but where your money goes and who it goes to, and how you visit cultures that are very different to your own, can all be really, really important parts of the sustainable tourism discussion. And it goes so much more than just the environment.
I just think that's so interesting. And I feel awful for not realizing this before, but you make such great points, how it has that knock-on effect to wider society, and how, more than just one immediate local would benefit from it. It would go on and on and on. And I guess it's always the easier option, right? When you look into traveling, you go on Hostel World or whatever websites you use, and you find a hostel or hotel, and they likely have the capacity to have some form of marketing, to be able to use the internet, have good internet access, and have that access to get, bring people over and use their hostel or visit their restaurant, whatever it is. And so, with bearing in mind with what you've said, like how important it is to go local and try and invest in the local community wherever you're traveling. How would you do you have any suggestions there in terms of how you could really do your research a bit better before traveling, especially if it's kind of harder to reach information?
Yeah, I mean, and there's no surefire way to know that you've chosen like a locally owned hostel, but generally, like for example, hostels or budget accommodation, or backpackers who travel on a budget generally do choose local places, whether they realize or not. The first thing to look for, like, is it independent? If you're staying in Mary's hostel, that's not a chain that's all around the world. Chances are maybe Mary's not a local herself, but she's like, it's an independent business in one location. The person who owns it, maybe they're not local, but they're not a multinational corporation, like for example Hilton Hotels or any of the chain things like Holiday Inn, I can't even think of any luxury hotel names because I never stay in them. But the Four Seasons and things that are all around the world that basically look the same in every single country that you visit. These hotels are the same. That's not local. Like they're not local. They're headquartered in the US or Australia or Canada or very developed countries. And, those obviously that's where the money goes back. So I think at the first thing, if you're not staying in a chain hotel or like resort or hostel, that's a good first step. Then from there, I mean, I think just kind of doing a little bit of research on the places that you book, booking.com or Hostel World or whatever are great places to book. But if you have the time and you can, just pop onto their website, read a little bit about the hostel and um, yeah, you might not find the exact answers. Like there's always a chance that things are owned by foreigners, for example. But as I said before, like if it's a hostel, an independent hostel in, a particular beachside town in Bali or whatever, even if the owner's not local, the smaller scale of the operation already kind of is likely that they're employing local people and investing in the local community, and the money that goes in, maybe it's not a local who owns it, but the money is more likely to stay local. So I think it's just kind of about learning how to use your judgment on places. And like I said, if you can avoid chain hotels, you've ticked a box, then you can kind of go down from there. And it doesn't really take much. Most places would have a little bit of an about or an information section on their website to kind of let you know when the hostel began. And sometimes you get really great stories of who owns it, and sometimes it might be foreigners who own them. But again, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. As long as it's a small scale that's kind of embedded into the local community, that's always going to be so much better than choosing a Hilton or, a Mantra or things that are just the same everywhere, that are international corporations that, yeah, are always, the money's never really going to stay local.
Yeah, that's great advice. I wanted to touch on kind of budget traveling. We're talking about the Hilton, these massive hotels. I think, hopefully people who are listening, or not hopefully, but I assume, the students who are listening, they're not regularly going from like the different Shangri-Las around the world, for example, and they're probably staying somewhere as cheap as they can get. But what would you say to those who might think that sustainable travel or traveling more sustainably is for those who have money? It's not really accessible for them. Um, any comments on budget sustainable
Yeah,
traveling?
absolutely. So I'm a budget traveler. My budget has probably increased a little bit more to my days, back in uni when we were staying in hostels. We still choose to stay in hostels, but I'm about to get married. So we stay in private rooms now. We've upped a level from the dorm beds, but we still travel on a budget, like local guest houses or like funky hostels or whatever. We're not staying in fancy resorts, but travel, like budget travel by its very nature. Not everyone travels in the exact same way just because they're on a budget, but generally the way that backpackers travel is inherently more sustainable. You usually stay longer, you travel slower, you stay in smaller scale operations, like whether they're locally owned or not. You're usually not staying in like mega resorts or huge hotels. Like it's usually going to be a hostel or a guest house or something that's a little bit smaller. um, you use local transport, you eat local food, because all those things are cheaper than, for example, a private shuttle to and from the airport, or flying between destinations, or eating at fancy five-star restaurants. The things that you do on a budget are generally just happen to be more sustainable, whether you're thinking about it or not. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. You can get lost in the wave of like labels of eco or green accommodation or an eco lodge or a sustainable hotel, or there's plenty of labels and there's plenty of marketing out there. But when you're a budget traveler, they probably don't have those things, but that doesn't mean that it's not sustainable. So I think what gets a lot of marketing and publicity is these beautiful like eco lodges in the jungle, and they are sustainable, like they really are. Or a luxury like off the grid beach resort or whatever, like they are sustainable, like they are doing great things, and they would have probably independent certification. So that would mean like another company would come in and assess all their operations against these strict sustainability standards, and they earn the little badge that they get. There's a lot of different companies that do that, that stamp them as being green and stamp them as being truly sustainable, and they're great options, but generally they come with a price tag. But it doesn't mean that other places, smaller hostels or locally owned, cheaper accommodation, it doesn't mean that they're not sustainable just because they don't have that. And they probably won't have that. So I think it's important to remember that, again, going back to the whole no one can get sustainability perfectly right, it just isn't possible. But it's not always going to be written out for you. Someone's not always going to have the direct answer right there that yes, everything has been approved as sustainable, because it's a really expensive and time consuming process to go through like an independent certification. And smaller scale places, and like a local tour guide who takes his own tours, or a small guest house it's just like a few rooms in someone's house, they can't afford to do that. But it doesn't mean that their operations, by their very nature, are probably more sustainable anyway. So you need to use a little bit of your own assessment when you travel on a budget, because you don't necessarily have those indicators that you get when you travel on like a luxury level, because there are those stamps and those certifications, and it's quite easy to see that yes, okay, someone else, a third party has come in and said that yes, this is like sustainable, so I know for sure. You don't have that at a budget level because it's just not really feasible, and they're not able to afford it. But use your common knowledge and your best judgment to look at the way that they operate as best that you can from the outside. And I think that you'll find that even without a stamp, you can see clearly that what they're doing is more sustainable than a mega resort or something like that.
Awesome. That was actually going to be pretty much my next question, was about kind of greenwashing and kind of what is sustainable, what isn't sustainable, because it's kind of on trend at the moment, this big push for sustainability, which is inherently good because it's great to have focus on this issue. But of course, big corporations are coming in, are seeing there's that drive and that demand for that, and are basing their marketing, changing what they offer based on that. Whether that's saying we are sustainable because of X, Y, Z, when, like you said, they very well may be, but it also may not be super sustainable. So I wanted to ask about this concept of greenwashing, if you can explain what greenwashing is for those who don't know, and things to be mindful of, things to look out for to make sure that you're not subscribing to something that is just greenwashing.
Yeah, so greenwashing is kind of a sustainability term across any area, really, not just travel. It could be in like fashion or products that you buy or any kind of area. And it's basically companies making false claims about their sustainability initiatives and how environmentally or societally friendly they are. So as Natalie said, like sustainability is in, like it's a trend now. People are interested in it and consumers are seeking it more than ever before. So as a result, businesses think, oh, well, I'm going to stamp on a green stamp and blast that out in my marketing, and that's how I'm going to get business. It's illegal in most places, but they can do it. You know what large corporations are like. They can be very clever, and they can do it in a way that they can make these claims that are true. Like they might say something that's true, but there's a million other things that don't fit the bill. So it's very easy to become overwhelmed. And I think, again, like it's impossible to know for sure. You never are really going to know if what people are claiming is true or not. But yeah, it's a tough one. And I always think, like, outside of the travel industry, for example, like the clothes that I'm wearing, I always struggle a lot with that, to think like, how am I ever going to know every single step that's gone into making this piece of clothing? Like they say it's sustainable, but you have no idea where the materials come from, where the dye comes from, like how it's put together, all the different stages it goes through. I think it's kind of easy to think about it with something tangible like a piece of clothing, because there's so many stages. But it's the same in travel. They can make claims about a certain aspect of their operations that is sustainable, but then there could be 20 other things that aren't sustainable. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that it can be really, really tricky to know for sure. The best thing to do, if you can, and again, this comes down to like that whole budget versus like higher luxury level travel, is within the tourism industry, there are a number of different certification bodies, they're called. So basically, if a hotel or a tour operator or something like that wants to, they know that they've done all the right things and they really are operating sustainably, and they want to prove it, they have someone independent come in and they assess their operations on a number of different categories. For example, like their energy, where that comes from, their waste, their water, the contribution to the community, where they get their food from, like so many different elements. Like it's a very complicated process, but someone else comes in from the outside and assesses them against this criteria, and they can then deem if they're sustainable or not. And that gives you confidence. If you see a certification label, it gives you more confidence because someone else has come in and looked at it, and it's not just that business saying we're sustainable. Like, you know, everyone wants to say positive things about their own business, but there's not really a lot of credibility in there, really, because people can say whatever they want. But if you can see that there is a stamp or a certification related to that business that's come from someone else, that can give you a lot of confidence. But again, it comes down to like being, if you're a budget traveler, you probably aren't going to find a lot of businesses that have that. So it's tricky. It's tricky because it's a very expensive process, like I said. So you can, you know, if you're making big decisions on like flights or tours or whatever, you're likely to see that. But if you travel like we do and you're kind of looking at staying in local places, they don't necessarily have that. So you just have to kind of use your best judgment. I would recommend like looking up some of the programs so you at least know the types of things that they look at. Like you don't have to go into depth. It can be very, very technical, but like I said, things like, you know, how they manage waste, where their energy comes from, where their water comes from, where they get their food from. So if you can see that there's a place that you want to stay in and they're small, they're local, it's very cheap for you to stay there. They obviously haven't gotten any certification, but you can see on their website that they talk all about their solar power, and they have water tanks and like water purification on site, and they grow their own food in the garden, and they say they employ local people, and they give back to the community. And I mean, these are all grand statements, and again, you have to take with a grain of salt what you believe from businesses directly, but it's a step in the right direction, and it's something that you can do and at least use your own gut feeling and your own judgment on what they're doing and how you feel that they're operating, to try and make your own little mini sustainability assessment, because it's not always going to be done for you in the budget world, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It's super easy to be kind of led astray. I remember in like different tours, for example, things that they claim to be like a different topic, but that isn't cruel to animals, for example, but actually is cruel. I mean, you think about it, and the way they just try to brand themselves and market themselves to kind of pander to those people who are looking and do want to make positive changes in the way that they travel. Well, like you said, I think it'll just depend on your budget here. If you're
Yeah.
lower end of the budget, you're just going to have to be up for doing a little bit more research. Doesn't have to be super extensive, but even just as much as just seeing how local they are, how involved with the community they are, if they are doing anything like the water tanks you were saying, and it won't take very long either. When at Pagoda, actually, we've just launched this sustainable program for next summer in locations in Europe that are close to our Manchester office. And I was part of the process of trying to piece together the most sustainable way we can visit these cities. And it's just, it's very complicated. And then I had to learn about offsetting, which I'd heard of. It's one of those words where I'm like, offsetting, yes, right. That sounds important.
That's
But
that's a thing. That's a
what is
green
that?
thing.
It sounds like a
Yeah.
green thing. It sounds like something we should be doing. Google's doing something about offsetting at the moment with like helping you search flights. But I think kind of on that topic, there are some people who might hear offsetting, you should do this, you should do that. Will be like, I don't know what this is. I haven't had the time to look up what this is. Like, how is this beneficial? For example, like I mentioned, Google, like they launched their own way to like check if they can offset their flights or how sustainable certain flights are. Could you tell us a little bit about offsetting, break that down for us, and if opting to offset for a flight, what that actually entails? What does offsetting your flight do, and if it's actually any
Yeah.
good?
So offsetting again can kind of be across a number of different industries, not just travel, but it is like very common. I think it kind of started in the flight space. So obviously if you jump on a plane, if you're from New Zealand or Australia, you will go on a plane. Like I will be going on a plane because it's virtually impossible to not go on a plane. So I'm not someone who thinks, no, you can't fly. It's not sustainable. No one should ever fly. Like if you have to fly, you should fly. If you have an option to not fly, you shouldn't fly. But basically, it started with airlines. Like, obviously, every time you get on a plane takes off, there is an enormous release of carbon. So traveling by air is one of the most carbon intensive things that you can do. Basically, offsetting is a way to help mitigate the carbon that you as a passenger have emitted, not you personally, but your seat on the plane has emitted. You can't, offsetting is not stopping the carbon from being emitted until we have a whole new take on how to fuel airplanes. Like, there is carbon going into the atmosphere when planes fly. So I think some people can sometimes get confused and think, oh, well, if I pay a little bit extra, like, it won't go into the atmosphere and it's all good. It's still happening, but offsetting is basically accounting for how much carbon you have released. So they have great ways that you can work out, like a plane going from Melbourne to Sydney releases this much carbon divided by how many seats, and it will tell you like your kind of contribution. So it breaks it down into what you individually, I suppose, have your share of the carbon that's been emitted. And what offsetting does is helps to reduce or prevent that amount of carbon being released into the atmosphere through something else. So basically the plane goes and the carbon still goes out into the atmosphere, of course. But if you have released, I don't know, 5 tons of carbon or whatever it might be through your journey on that trip, you can offset it through a project such as tree planting or a renewable energy project, or restoring like marine environments, things that sink carbon. So for example, like the ocean, mangroves, trees store carbon. So if they can now quantify, if you contribute to planting this many trees, that it can save as much carbon as you release on the plane. Very complicated calculations, and I can't tell you how they do it because I don't know. But they're sophisticated enough to say, well, your flight releases this, and if you contribute that, we plant this many trees, and that's that much carbon stored. Or whether it's stored in an ocean, or like I said, it can be different things like a renewable energy project. So you contribute to a wind farm or a solar farm or something like that, and whatever carbon you use on the plane, they can quantify how much they can save by using a renewable source of energy versus like coal powered energy or whatever. So it's trying to like fix the problem that you've created a little bit. It doesn't solve it. The best thing is to try and not do it in the first place if you can, but it's doing something bad and then trying to contribute something positive in another area where, they can control and reduce carbon to try and make up for it. So if everyone flies on planes, but they plant 10 trees or, whatever it works out to be, like, it's a positive thing. It's better if no one flies on planes, but that's not realistic and that's not feasible in the world that we live in. And I don't think that we should stop doing that. But yeah, so I suppose like it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. I'm skeptical on how beneficial it actually is. And to be completely honest, you go through online, I don't know if anyone's experienced this, you're booking your flights, you add in your luggage, and by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, that's really expensive. And then they hit you with the like, do you want to add $15 or $20 or $30 or whatever to like offset your flight? And you're like, not really. I don't really, like, I've just spent $3,000. I don't really want to offset it. So it's a tricky one. Like, it is a positive thing, and if you can do it, you should do it. Sometimes I don't do it because no one's perfect, and sometimes I just think I just cannot spare an extra $30. But I know that I can try and do other things when I travel to help reduce my impact. And no one can do everything. So it is a good thing. And if you can do it, I don't want to discourage you. You should do it. And I try to do it as much as I can. But people find different parts of this whole sustainability thing easier to do and more suitable to them. So if you think offsetting isn't your thing and you just can't do it, you're on a tight budget like many people are, well, then you need to figure out other things that you can do to kind of, I suppose, help counteract that carbon that you've used or that you've emitted by going on the plane.
Yeah, it took me a little while to get my head around it. I thought somehow it literally negated the carbon that was emitted, which is in essence what it's trying to do. But by giving the flight companies that extra money for offsetting, they're not like doing anything different to the fuel or whatever. Like, I don't know. I didn't realize if they'd managed to work that out yet. But when
They've
I
had a
was
lot of
doing
time to work it out, and they still haven't really worked it out. So
yeah,
I will just add something to say, like, going through the option that the airline offers you when there's that little tick box it may or may not be the greatest. Again, like it could just be a greenwashing thing. Like the money is going somewhere, but how beneficial those projects are, I don't know. I would suggest looking into like external offsetting programs. So there's tons of them out there, and they can help you kind of calculate your emissions for an entire trip if you want to. So if you think I'm going to take a plane, then I'm going to go on a tour. Sometimes tour companies can even work out your like carbon total for an entire tour. Transport that you're going to use, like you're never going to get every single part of it, as you have seen that it's really complicated to like work out like bus, car, like a 2-minute taxi trip, or everything that can contribute. Like you can never get it perfectly right, but if you want to have a more holistic approach, you can try and roughly work it out for an entire trip, not just a flight, and then do it with an external company. Sustainable Travel International are a great sustainable travel NGO, and they offer an offsetting program, and they're tourism focused. So they kind of work on projects in really popular tourism destinations around the world that need it. So I would suggest looking into something like that. Like I think it's a pretty fitting cause, to contribute your offsetting funds to, and that they're working on projects like that are really within that sustainable tourism industry, which is nice. I think a lot of the offsetting can go to, energy and things like that, which is still positive for our environment, but it's nice to contribute something to the tourism world when you're traveling, and that's where the carbon is coming from, I suppose.
Definitely. I think you make a great point, like looking into external options to offsetting, it's actually way cheaper. There are lots of like carbon calculators online that break it down into really easy ways. Like if you are traveling by flying, you pop that down, a car ride, etc. You can break it all down. They'll do the calculation for you, and then you can give that number, whatever, to your external provider who can help you work out how much you would need to pay, and every offsetting project will cost a certain amount as well, what I found, like depending on where it is in the world and what the project is. There are definitely different budgets, and there are a lot of like really good ones out there. So we, for example, are looking into gold standard ones. That's the literal name of them. So definitely, if you've got that extra time and you do want to do your bit, but you're not 100% sure how is best to do it, look at some third party or like external nonprofits or other companies who are doing offsetting and such things. We've got quite a lot of questions that have just come in, which is awesome to see. I don't know if you can see them there, Sally. Ooh, I'll start with this one from an anonymous attendee. How is sustainability perceived different in the East versus the West?
This is like a really massive thing, and I can't speak on behalf of different cultures, but I think the way that I view it, and the people side of sustainability and the human side of tourism in general, is like super complex, like more complex than the environment, because it's not scientific and no one can really quantify it. But I see it as really, really challenging, because in the West, in developed countries, we have been the culprits of this enormous increase in global temperature. We've the ones who've developed and who've had industry and who've pumped carbon and terrible things into our atmosphere for years while we've grown. And now we can see, now with what we know now, we know that wasn't a good thing. So we point the finger at countries who are less developed, saying you shouldn't do that, that's the wrong thing to do. But they just want their piece of the development pie, because they want to reach levels that we Western countries have. And it's so tricky, because we know that it's wrong, and you just have to hope that they can also see that it's wrong. And I think many developing countries do see that, and they're doing things completely different to the way that countries like Australia or the US developed, and they are doing it right. But I think many countries are chasing those levels of development that we have had in the past. And how can you tell them that they are not allowed to experience the same thing that we have too? So I think it's a complete mix on different countries, and there are certain pockets around the world, different countries, that their whole entire development of their economies, their industries, has just been sustainable. And I guess you have to thank the people in power for making that a priority. But then there are other countries who have completely different views, and development, for example, and increasing and expanding their economies and their industries has come before sustainability. So it's tricky. I think in the tourism sphere, like countries that rely a lot on tourism are probably countries that are more likely to be geared towards that sustainability mindset, obviously within the industry, but hopefully also without, because it kind of spreads through. Like if they want visitors to come and tourism is a big part of their economy, the demand from travelers, especially now and going into the future, is for sustainability. So you hope that they're moving in the right direction, but it's really different for everyone. And I think, human development plays a massive part in any discussion about sustainability, whether it's within the tourism industry or outside of it. And it's hard to point the finger, if you will, at people who are just kind of following in the steps of what the developed countries have done. And we're the ones who have had a massive impact on the environment. So yeah, it's a tough one to answer.
Definitely. I think what you said basically, it would be easy to say we have one solution to saving the world and helping out climate change and sustainability, but it's just not fair. And it doesn't quite work like that. Every country's situation is extremely different. Their development has been very different. And it's really important that we're mindful of that. If we in the West are going to be pointing fingers like you should do this, you should do that, well, then we should go in and try and help them in a way that, or not help, but provide them with resources that will help them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve in a more sustainable way, as opposed to putting all the burden on them. Like, well, we are now at a point that we can do this ourselves and you should do that too. So it should be a bit more collaborative if we're all going to do this together, not just like bung it all in a country or an area of the world that is struggling, for example. So really complicated issue, really difficult to answer. But still, I think you answered it very well, very diplomatically and really thoughtfully. Someone's asked, what role do you think travel writers, bloggers, influencers can play in sustainability and tourism? So super relevant for you.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that I think just by people talking about it, really, like I think it's a massive role in the things that, I mean, people consume content like never before, and people look to others for suggestions on basically everything, not just travel, but how to live. We live our lives through other people. That's just the world that we live in through social media and things like that. So I think just people just sharing. I mean, that's what I aim to do, like sharing what I know, sharing what I experience, sharing what I fail at. I think that's a really important part. Like I said before a million times, no one gets sustainability perfect, and that goes for people who are experts or have interest in the area, or are trying to achieve in that space. And yeah, I think when people who have influence, which like in the world that we live in, the influence does come from peers now. I don't think it comes from necessarily companies or media. It comes from individuals, influencers, bloggers, writers, whatever. And I think if people continue to just make this something that they prioritize and something that they can share with their audience, hopefully people start picking it up and listening. Like maybe if it's never kind of come to them through any other channel before, this is a great channel for people to start thinking about things that they've never thought about before. And I think as someone who has studied in this area and I have an interest in this area, it's hard for me to imagine that people can't see what they're doing when they travel and the impact that they're having. But some people just don't, because they've never been told, they've never been educated, they've never had anyone or anything make them second guess or consider their actions. So I think in a world where people are so influenced by people like influencers, bloggers, writers, like it's a really, really great space and a great way for people to become educated on the issues and hopefully follow in the footsteps a little bit. So yeah.
Absolutely. The best way to reach people at the moment is through influencers, social media, TikTok, all these different mediums.
Just through other people. Like people just want to consume from peers. Like they don't want to consume or be educated or be told by corporations or businesses or media. Like it's through other people. So I think people just sharing their journey and what they know and what they do and how to inspire others to do the same. It's the best thing really that we can do.
Absolutely. So that kind of ties into someone else's question they've asked. How do you see sustainable tourism evolving and what is the role of travel media in that? So I guess travel media now isn't, say, as effective as it was before, and it's kind of moved to more bloggers and influencers now. But how do you see sustainable tourism evolving from where it is now?
I mean, I think we have a lot to watch for as tourism kind of actually picks up and goes again. I mean, it seems like around the world outside of Australia and New Zealand it is going, but in our little sphere and our little bubble over here, it hasn't really been happening. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it moves. And I think we really just need to see whether we can bridge the gap between people thinking, yes, okay, there's a problem in the world and we need to travel more sustainably, to people actually taking the time to learn and understand what they can do and going beyond just the superficial view of what being sustainable as a traveler actually is. We could talk about this all day. We kind of didn't really get into it, but it's easy for people to be like, okay, cool, like the hotel says it's green, awesome, I'm doing sustainable things. But can we bridge the gap between just that superficial, very basic understanding of what it means to travel sustainably, and are people interested enough? Because people jump on trends and like sustainability is trendy, but are people willing to make sacrifices to change the way they travel, to take the time to research and to understand and to consider their actions? And a big part of sustainability, which we kind of didn't really get to talk about, is just our own actions. We talked more about, the operators in the industry and the travel suppliers that we work with, but there are so many things that we can do as individuals, regardless of who you operate with. If you can't kind of nail the accommodation, or you can't afford to go with an eco certified tour, there are still so many things that you can do to ensure that the impacts that you can control yourself, are minimal, but a lot of them require sacrifice. And I think some people think that they're willing to make them, but they aren't. They're not willing to sacrifice the way that they travel, and they're not willing to prepare themselves properly so that they are able to make positive decisions when they're traveling. So I think that's what's interesting and what to watch out for.
Absolutely. I think to travel sustainably or do anything sustainably, there's some sort of like preparation there, even just in day-to-day life, like reusable cups. If you've got a reusable cup, you've got to remember to wash it, put it in your bag and take it with you. Same with bottles, for example. But
that's a perfect example. It takes time, preparation, and commitment, and it takes people willing to sacrifice on convenience. Like if you forget your cup, you don't get a takeaway coffee. Like there has, and that's a very small example, but those things happen millions of times a day for billions of people. And if no one is willing to say, okay, well, I don't get a coffee because I didn't bring my cup, like we're never going to make change. So I think, yeah, it's all trendy now, and things have changed in the environment since we haven't been traveling, and people think that they're interested, but are people genuinely interested, and are people genuinely committed to making a change? So I think, and the role, to answer the second part of the question, of travel media, whether that's like the traditional media or influencers and bloggers and stuff, I think it just has to be really being more than providing more information than just you should travel sustainably. Like it's just not enough. People need to be educated, and I think that's a role that we can play, and unpacking and like busting the myths of what actually sustainable travel really is and what it's not, which is just finding a little tick or a little green stamp on a website and that's enough. So
definitely. Yeah. And moving from, there being travel and there's sustainable travel, kind of trying to move it into just being that's what travel is. The way we travel should just be, it should be a habit, is what we do in terms of how we approach it and do it in a more sustainable way, not just to try and brand it as a sustainable thing that we only do for feeling like we want to do something good for the world, but something that is just expected of how we go about travel or anything really.
Absolutely.
But someone has asked, what are your top 3 tips for those looking to travel and keep their impact low? So I guess that kind of comes into expanding into what we can do on an individual basis.
Yes. Oh my God, I have so many tips. And for me, I think as a budget traveler, I think this is an area that I find I'm more passionate about because I feel like it's something I can control. Like I know that I often fail on the places that we stay at, or I'm not finding things that are certified, or I never know for sure because it's just not the style of travel that I can afford to do or that I usually do. But I'm really confident that I know what I can control and what I can do when we travel. They might seem like very minor, small things, but I know that if I do them all the time, every time I travel, that it's going to help. So I think you can kind of like break it down into a few different areas. I mean, the first is waste. Obviously, that's not just an issue for travel. Everywhere around the world, like you said, reusable cups, water bottles, having your own cutlery, straws, tote bags, all those things that are like really common where you live. In most places around the world, people are jumping on the reusable train, but that applies definitely more so when you travel, because often, especially from places like Australia and New Zealand and the UK, we're traveling to countries that are usually less developed than we are, and You think, oh, I've used a coffee cup in Australia, it's all right, I can recycle the lid or whatever. When you're traveling to places that don't have proper recycling systems, that don't have proper waste management systems, like what seems like a minor thing can snowball into so many other issues if every traveler does the same thing. So tip one, reduce your waste, like just say no to plastic, because it just has a devastating impact all around the world, but generally more so in popular tourist destinations because they don't necessarily have the facilities to manage it. Reduce emissions is a kind of second area. So, you can't change the way that planes are fueled, but you can change the way that you travel. So if you need to fly, which if you're from Australia or New Zealand, you do, fly as little as possible, fly direct if you can. The more stops, like the higher the emissions become. And don't fly when you get there. Like, don't fly around a region, don't fly around a country. Always consider your transport and kind of work down the list of the most carbon efficient, effective, I'm not sure the right word, but walking is the best. Walking or riding a bike like produces no carbon, or jumping on public transport like a train or a bus that's shared by a lot of passengers, that's another great option. Having your own car or your own truck, or going on a plane is the worst option. So understand, I suppose, the scale of transport options, and if you can make decisions to reduce emissions as you travel, that's a great thing. You're always going to, in most situations, you're going to have to fly. Like, I'm going to get on a plane and fly to Mexico, and unfortunately, it's going to be 3 different flights because there's no other option, which is not great. But our next plan is to travel all the way through Mexico, Central America, and South America without catching one plane. So I can't avoid a plane to get to there, but we are hoping, I'm not sure if it's possible, but we're hoping to go all the way through probably 20,000 kilometers without catching a flight, because there's buses, there's trains, there's boats, there's other options. So consider your options. And with the emissions as well, like just basic things that you can do, like usually people would never do them at home, leaving lights on, leaving air conditioners on, and things like that. Not hanging up your towels, getting your room changed every day. Like, they seem really basic, but when people travel, when they go on holidays, they just want to relax. They forget about all their standards that they usually live by at home. They're like, oh, it's really hot, I'll just leave the aircon on, so when they come back it's going to be really cool, and oh, my towel's a little bit wet still, I'll get it changed. Like, it's all very basic stuff, but just sticking to the way that I'm sure most people would live at home when you travel, to prevent those like kind of extra emissions and energy use that's not necessary. And then we already talked about trying to choose places that are as sustainable as possible. Maybe they're not certified, but a massive resort with a golf course, 5 pools, who has the air conditioning on when you enter the room, that's probably not a great option. So you might not get it completely right, but that you can scale it back a level or two. And then I think the other one for me is just the impact that we have on the environment, which again kind of breaks down into so many things. And you can't really quantify the impact that, the hotel that you're staying in or the tour that you're on, like, it can be difficult to quantify that, but what you can do and what your actions on the environment are when you travel, and what you can do to do the right thing. I'm really, really passionate about animals. If you want to do something that is an animal not in their natural habitat, not in the wild, just don't do it. Like, it's so obvious, it's so clear, unless you live under a rock, that so many tourist attractions around the world that involve animals are not ethical, and they're not sustainable, and they're cruel. It's easy to get sucked in because everybody wants to cuddle a tiger or like swim with a dolphin or whatever. Like, I love animals, I want to be close to them, everyone does, it's human nature, but you have to make sacrifices because you can see when things are wrong. So I think that's a really important one. And just leaving places as you found them. Who wants to go and travel to the other side of the world to visit stunning natural areas or islands or coral reefs or mountains and then trash it, to not stay on paths and to take things that you shouldn't and to leave rubbish behind? Like, it's all basic things, but like I said earlier, when people travel, their ethical standards and the way that they would normally live at home tends to go out the window because they just want to have a good time. So stick to the way that you wouldn't leave rubbish in your house or in your hometown or whatever. Don't do the same thing when you travel. That was like 25 tips squeezed into 3 different sections. So you got a lot of
Love it.
extras in there. Sorry.
We want all the tips. that was amazing. I'm like mentally trying to take notes, but thankfully this is recorded so I can watch back and write everything down.
And I have plenty of stuff in my blog. I have a whole post of like tons of tips that you can go through. So that will be helpful, hopefully be helpful too.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to finish up on, just asking about resources and want to, remind everyone watching that, like I said, Sally's a blogger, Sally Sees, definitely check it out if you want to find some more info on sustainable travel and also to find out about her awesome travels to Mexico, which I'm definitely going to find your Instagram and follow you on it just so I can keep up to date. I'm so jealous. That sounds amazing. And what a feat that would be to be able to make it all the way through Latin America just via public transport. So that sounds like an amazing journey. But yeah, just quickly before we finish up, are there any other resources or anything else that you want to add before we finish up, Sally?
I think like just research. Like, like I said, we live in a world where we just consume content from Instagram, TikTok, blogs. Like if you Google sustainable travel or you type it into Instagram, like you're going to find so many amazing people doing really great things and sharing tons of great knowledge. There's a couple of like different NGOs or sustainable travel organizations around the world that always share good stuff. Sustainable Travel International, Global Sustainable Tourism Council is a really good one, and they're one of the biggest certification bodies too. So that could be a really cool place to start if you just want to kind of learn a little bit more about what they assess things on, what actually is sustainable and what would meet a certification. They're really great, but I think just remembering like if you don't know if what you're doing is right, just Google it. Like same with everything in the world, but there are enough people out there who are doing sustainable travel really well and who understand it really well and who've kind of been like working in that space for a long time that if you don't know how to solve a problem that you think is unsustainable or whatever, just look it up. You will find things. I think like everything that you think is it's just the way it is. It's not the way it is. Like, for example, I just got a really, really awesome product the other day, which is a water bottle that purifies water. So whenever you travel overseas to many countries around the world, you can't drink water. Like many people just buy bottles because you think, oh, well, there's no other option. Like I have to drink clean water. Well, this bottle, like you put water in and it uses like a UV light to filter water. Like you might have heard of that already, which is really cool. But there are so many amazing advances in technology and people are doing amazing. They're solving so many problems that we've never thought of before. So just research, just spend some time like looking up things. And if there's anything that you're not sure of or you don't know how to solve a problem because you know that something that you're doing isn't right, I'm sure someone else has solved it for you. So I guess just use the resources that there are because there are so many.
Very well put. The internet is a great place, has
Yeah.
a lot of great information, and a quick Google can take you where you need to be, or just, approach you for the information.
Yeah.
I guess I
Please feel
also
free. There's like so many questions that we didn't get to, but if anyone has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them on Instagram or whatever.
Awesome, great, fantastic. I will follow up with everyone watching today with some of the resources that Sally has mentioned, as well as her blog details and how to get in touch with her if you'd like to. But thank you so much, everyone, for watching. That's us 3 minutes over. But I really appreciate everyone joining us today and asking your amazing questions. Again, please do follow up with Sally if you have any further questions to ask her or if you want more direct feedback from her. And thank you, Sally, as well. Thank you so much. I know it's been a busy time for you preparing and getting ready to go to the other side of the world, but it's been great having you here. And, you've been a really great speaker and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for having me and thank you so much for coming, guys. Just do what you can. That's my best piece of advice. Do what you can. You can't get everything right, but the fear of not being able to nail it stops people from taking any action. So anything that you can do, any small thing that you can do, any positive change, whether that's going out and buying a coffee cup, that is a good thing. So you don't have to get it completely right. You just need to try and move step by step through the process of becoming, a more sustainable traveler. So do what you can.
Awesome. Great way to end it. So thank you, everyone, and we'll